all, please let me welcome all of you here this morning, and congratulations for getting up early. I'm not a morning person myself, but it's delightful to be here and to see such a big turnout of Cornell families. My name is Diane Rosen. I'm a graduate of the ILR School, class of 78, and the parent of Amanda Rosen, who is the class of 2012. She is upstairs sleeping. And a freshman, class of 2017, also in the ILR School. And 2 months ago, I married an ILR graduate from the class of 1975. So I'm here to prove that a Cornell education is the gift that keeps on giving. So it's really been a pleasure to be involved and engaged with Cornell University, and I hope that all of you are having a great experience. This is a great event, and I'm sure the rest of the day is going to be amazing. So this morning, we are very, very fortunate to have with us the Cornell Forensics Society, which is the only university-sponsored speech and debate organization at Cornell. And they're going to do something really kind of fabulous this morning. Sam Nelson, who is the director of forensics and a senior lecturer at the ILR School, is the director of this group. And he graduated from the University of Southern California and holds a JD and Master's in Speech and Communication from Syracuse University. He taught debate and other speech communication courses at the University of Vermont, SUNY Genesco, Syracuse, and the University of Rochester. He's going to tell us more about this highly accomplished team and the format of this morning's presentation. And with that, let me welcome Sam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here at Cornell. I've been a faculty member here for the last 8 years. My wife graduated from Cornell in nutrition. That's how I was originally lured from the West Coast to the East Coast. And so I'm happy to be here. And one of the things I'm most proud of is my involvement with the speech and debate team, which we call the Cornell Forensics Society. People often get confused about forensics. They're like, you're the director of forensics. What is this, CSI? And actually, forensics comes from the same Latin and Greek roots as the word for inquiry. So medical forensics is autopsies and that sort of thing, and we're doing philosophical inquiry in the Cornell Forensics Society. And a lot of that requires knowledge of speech and debate, especially the debate part. Last year, the International Debate Education Association ranked all of the debate programs in the world. Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and Cornell was ranked the #1 program in the world. And you know, the hard thing is maintaining that. So one way that we try to maintain our excellence is to practice all the time, practice. So great opportunity to be able to come here today and participate in this debate in front of you. I want to tell you a little bit about how this debate came to be. So the class of 1964 is having their reunion, their 50th reunion this coming summer in June. And I got a phone call from the people in Alumni Affairs and Development, and they said, we have a guy that wants to have a debate, and you seem like to be the person on campus that knows about a debate. Can you help us come up with a topic and such? And that individual was Steve Einhorn. Steve is right here, and his wife Nancy, right? Graduated in the class of 64. And I got on the phone, I talked to him, and he said, what I would really like to do is have a debate about intellectual diversity, but I really want it to be about our conservative ideas being marginalized on the Cornell campus. This is something near and dear to his heart, something that he's been interested in, but people think it's too hot to handle. And I said, well, I don't think so. Debate is about disagreement. The university should be about ideas, clashing. And then if they can't happen on the university, where can they happen? So he said, do you think this can happen? I said, yes, I think it can happen. Yeah. Then people got nervous when they found out. Right? And so we said, we made our pitch. And then we said, okay, we're going to have it at reunion, the class of 1964 reunion. We'll have that debate then. And then I got a phone call just by happenstance from Casey, she's around here somewhere, they're back there saying, "Do you have a good idea for a debate that we could have?" Do I have a good idea? So the Einhorns actually flew in from Milwaukee to see this debate, and actually he gave a speech yesterday. Since I had him here, I took a real advantage of him about venture capitalism. But and so we said this will be a practice run. All 4 debaters that are going to take part in today's debate are going to be in the debate in June as well. So I think it's going to be a really good debate, and I'd like to introduce the 4 debaters at this time. All 4 of you come up, take your positions in battle. I'm going to explain, while they're getting seated, I'm going to explain what's going to happen.
Are we getting specific actions for the debate?
No, but what will happen is, after the debate, we'd like you to, ask yourself, was I persuaded? Who did the better job of debating? I'll probably ask several different questions, like, did you change your mind? Who did a better job of debating? Who would you have, voted for if you were a debate judge? Who, that sort of thing. Just to get a quick show of hands at the end of the debate. So there is a competitive atmosphere here. Also, I would point out that the debaters pretty much believe what they're saying today. We chose the debaters because they happen to fall on one side of the aisle or the other as this particular. That's not always the case in competitive debates. Oftentimes I really like it when someone has to defend something that they don't believe in, because I'm a big believer in the old saying, you don't really understand your own position until you understand those that disagree with you. And one of the best ways to do that is to be forced to debate something you don't think you agree with at that moment. So here's what's going to happen. Each person is going to get to speak for 7 minutes on the topic. The topic is, this House believes that Cornell should do more to stop marginalizing conservative ideas on campus. So it's very specific to Cornell. It's a nice, meaty topic. Okay. And then what's going to happen is, after 1 minute is up, and they're speaking, I'm going to clap my hands. And that means a team member from the other side can stand up, put their hand up like this, or just stand up, or in the way they do it in England, is put their hand on their head to symbolically hold their wig on. And stand up like this and say, point of information, or, will you take my question? The speaker doesn't have to take the question. They can say, no, thank you, please sit down. I'm not finished talking yet. But occasionally they will take, 1 or 2 times during their speech, they'll take a question from the opposing side. And the opposing side is usually trying to ask sort of a knockout question, like, what about the children? And then people will pause for a second and then try to answer it the best they can. And then, so each speech will take 7 minutes. At the remaining minute of the speech, I'll clap my hands again, and then they can't be interrupted during that last minute. So the first minute and the last minute, they can't be interrupted with questions. But the 5 minutes in between, sides can stand up and try to get a question in. And then there's really no rules after that. It's a lot of fun. I do want to kind of make this a rowdy, experience for everybody involved here. So if somebody says something that you like, you can bang on the table like this. Someone makes a good point or does a good thing or something, right? So usually that adds to the excitement. Okay, I'm going to have each of the debaters introduce themselves very quickly, and then I'm going to add a few comments in after they give their introduction, correct any mistakes or falsities that they happen to say about themselves. So why don't we start over here?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Gross. I'm originally from the D.C. area. I went to undergrad at the University of Vermont, and now I'm a master's student in the School of Industrial and Labor Relations, focusing on dispute resolution, arbitration, and mediation. And next year I'll be attending law school at Harvard.
Yep. So I'll tell you a little bit about Paul. So Paul was one of the top debaters in the United States 2 years ago. And one of the great things about being a faculty member in ILR, having a debate there, is they allow me to recruit graduate students to come help me coach the debate team. So I trudged all the way up to Burlington, Vermont, convinced Paul to apply to the ILR school. He got in, and for the last 2 years, he's been the assistant debate coach. In the World Championship division, graduate students can debate, but Paul's decided not to debate and just focusing on coaching. And like you said, next year he'll be going to Harvard Law School. So it's great that he's now part of the Cornell family. And thanks very much, Paul, for helping me out these last 2 years. Okay, next.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Huang and I'm currently a senior in the School of Industrial and Labor Relations. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. And next year I was selected as a Luce Scholar, so I'll be spending my year in Cambodia working on labor law advocacy.
So a lot of people don't know about the Luce Scholarship. It's kind of like a Rhodes Scholarship or the Marshall Scholar. And were you the first ILR student selected as a Luce Scholar in the long history of the scholarship? And she'll be going to Cambodia studying the garment industry. She's on the worker side. She's trying to make it better for the workers, not for the company owners. And Michelle has the distinction of very few people. She did several formats of debate and advanced to the elimination rounds of the national championships at every format. So not only policy debate, which is a very technical type of debate, she made it to the elimination rounds in that, but also just a few weeks ago at the U.S. British Parliamentary Championship, she also made it to the elimination round. So she's a real all-star.
Hi everybody, my name is Jessica Reif. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I'm a senior in the School of Industrial and Labor Relations. I've been involved with the Forensic Society since my sophomore year, but I also served as the chairman of the Cornell University College Republicans, the most notorious group on campus. So this topic is extra special, close to my heart, and thank you, Sam, for inviting me to speak today.
Sure, and Jessica is really a go-getter in many ways, but I had the pleasure 2 years ago of moderating a debate between former Senator Rick Santorum and former Governor Howard Dean. Two very extreme members. It was held in Bailey Hall. 1,500 people came, and it was all organized by Jessica. This past year, she had former Governor Jeb Bush, here on campus, and that was also just a huge... It's also a huge undertaking on her part. Next year, she's going to work in the consulting field in Washington, D.C. Former General McChrystal has hired her to work for his consulting firm that he has recently decided to open. Okay?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julius Kerry. I am a junior and a government major. I hail from Eatontown, New Jersey, which is a small town in Monmouth County right near the Jersey Shore. During my time at Cornell, I've also written a column for the Cornell Daily Sun, representing a conservative viewpoint and an overwhelmingly liberal publication. And additionally, I'll be working at the Heritage Foundation this summer in their legal department. So I'm really looking forward to today's debate, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you.
Okay, so somehow I was able to find the two most liberal students ever to walk on our campus and have them debate against each other. So without further ado, I call the Prime Minister of today's debate.
Thank you again, Sam, for having me here. And as a conservative, I can say that it's really exciting for me to have the opportunity to defend a belief that I actually believe in, instead of the ones that I don't, that I'm so frequently called upon to defend in class. It's funny, so I served as the president of the College Republicans here, but before coming to Cornell, I never once would have identified myself as a conservative or a Republican. And I took a survey in 2012 before the election, and it said that I agreed with Barack Obama 48% of the time and Mitt Romney 52% of the time, which in most places would make me a moderate or center-right. But as Sam said, I'm one of the most conservative students on campus. So if that says a little something about the ideological climate here, it's that. So when I tell other students that I'm a Republican, they make a lot of assumptions about me, and it's really interesting to hear what they have to say. They assume that I'm rich, that I'm from the South. most damningly that I'm bigoted and that I hate gay people and that I want the poor and the disadvantaged to die in the streets, and they're shocked to learn that I hold none of these positions and that I'm none of these things, and that I'm from a working class family in inner city Chicago, that I couldn't read until I was in high school, and that I actually do believe in equal opportunity for all people, and that I believe conservatism is the path to get there. They're totally surprised to learn my story and my path to conservatism because they're only exposed to this minority conservative perspective that they see on Fox News rather than to actual ideological conservatism introduced in their classes. And they're baffled, they're absolutely baffled to learn that somebody who's, by all other accounts considered to be like a decent human being could possibly identify as a conservative. So as a moderate Republican, I'm really, really proud to defend this resolution. And so first of all, I'm going to briefly explain kind of how the leftwards orientation of our campus came to be, and then dive deeper into how the lack of ideological debate on this campus is extremely harmful to students, but not just the students you'd expect, the liberal students as well. Liberal students, I would argue, actually suffer more than their conservative counterparts as a result of our campus's lack of intellectual diversity. So first, a little bit about the history of how Cornell got to be the bastion of liberal ideology that it is today. So there's been a national trend in college campuses, towards having more liberal faculty members, and Cornell isn't alone in that. But Cornell has actually had a uniquely difficult time attracting conservative faculty members after a lot of the conservative faculty members they had in the 1960s and 70s received death threats as a result of the Warder Strait Hall takeover, and when they spoke up against affirmative action admissions policies, they would receive death threats. Their family received death threats, and it's long since been known that Cornell is not a friendly place to teach if you hold conservative positions. And right now, our public records indicate that less than 10% of Cornell professors are registered Republican. But the uniform left-wing orientation of Cornell's faculty members shouldn't be concerning or surprising to anybody. It's like that throughout all of academia. And we really shouldn't necessarily care on exactly, is our professor a Republican or a Democrat? We should care about whether or not they're open to hearing both sides. And that's just not the case here at Cornell. We should focus on hiring professors who show tolerance of both sides of the spectrum and are willing to teach the merits of both arguments so that students can form their own opinions, because this kind of dialogue is absolutely necessary for intellectual development. Like what Sam was saying earlier, is the best way to learn your own position is to actually have to challenge it and defend the other side. And that's what makes a truly intellectually and ideologically developed individual. Unfortunately, Cornell is the MSNBC of universities. Its faculty preach a very uniform way of thinking, and it's very clearly reflected in our classes and assignments. In fact, just last semester, I had to give a PowerPoint presentation on unions in America, and I put in one slide that suggested that perhaps unions weren't solely doing good, and I was actually given a significant dock to my grade because that wasn't consistent with the assignment. And at Cornell, we're just actually actively discouraged in the classroom from engaging in intellectually stimulating discussion in favor of regurgitating these liberal talking points that our professors give us in class. We're unable to actually engage with the ideas because we don't see both sides of them. But
Point of information.
Yes.
Do you think there's a reason that a conservative professor wouldn't do the same thing?
I actually don't think that there's a reason that a conservative professor wouldn't do the same thing. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not advocating for we need to have 50% Republicans and 50% Democrats teaching here. What I'm arguing is that we need to have 100% of faculty members open to hearing both sides of the argument, open to teaching both sides of the argument, and opening to foster a debate in their class. So the systematic marginalization of conservative viewpoints is not limited to the classroom, though. It actually extends to all facets of student life. Liberal speakers, sometimes even political candidates, are often invited here to speak. And the university spends hundreds of thousands of dollars every single year bringing these speakers to come give lectures on campus, bringing these speakers to come engage with students. But they're not so big on bringing in conservative viewpoints. In fact, any conservative speaker that has come in the 3 years that I've been here, it's been solely because conservative students have invited that speaker, solely because conservative student groups have fought to have that side of the table represented. A lot of university and academic departments will bring in liberal speakers, but they do not bring in conservative speakers because they don't necessarily place value on introducing that sort of thought that they don't agree with. The culture of blindly accepting liberal talking points as facts has really stunted intellectual dialogue on our campus, and it's created a student body that is liberal by default rather than liberal by conscious choice. And students build up this idea of Republicans as gay-bashing, women-hating, stuck-in-the-past idiots, and they sometimes have, they just have their mind completely blown when they meet somebody like me who defies their stereotype. The majority on this campus the majority of students on this campus, though, are actually liberal, and they lack the impetus to kind of question their views because they're not encouraged to do so in class. And I think that. So what ends up happening is they become more entrenched in their positions without becoming more knowledgeable about why they hold them, and this is just an absolutely toxic combination. Now, on the flip side, my conservative friends actually make out pretty well. Members of the Cornell Republicans graduate having developed thick skin, the courage to defend their beliefs, and a thoughtful understanding of the other side. 4 years at Cornell provides a tremendous advantage to conservative students and a tremendous disadvantage to liberal students, which is the majority of students. Anyone who has the audacity to flip the switch of being that default liberal college student and actually stand up for conservative positions is going to be able to defend his or her views no matter where she goes, because she's going to be so well versed in liberal thought from what her professors have been teaching her that she'll be able to strike down those ideas regardless. However, we don't see that same intellectual development in our liberal students because they are never challenged. The majority of students are not conservative, and they are denied the intellectual stimulation that conservative students actually receive every single day in class when their deeply held positions and personal views are challenged. When we see Cornell alum graduate unable to thoughtfully respond to conservative arguments because they have literally never heard them before, and for a school where Democrats outnumber Republicans 20 to 1, more than 2/3 of the Cornell alum who move on to become elected officials are Republicans. Why might this be the case? Liberal students graduate without ever challenging their views or having to understand the other side. And if Cornell wishes to truly be that university that Sam was talking about earlier, this epicenter of intellectual development, it really needs to do more to encourage two-way debates, and that means stop marginalizing conservative views.
The debaters speak a little fast. I'm going to ask the debaters to slow down for now.
Sorry.
Good job. All right. Good job. I call the next speaker the leader of the opposition.
We believe that universities are really important laboratories for alternative thought. There are unique incubators of dialogue against the status quo, and discussions about change, discussions about progressiveness can only occur and flourish on campuses in a way that they really can't other places in the status quo, in other areas where political dialogue is accepted and had. Recall that Cornell University has traditionally been a place for social justice initiatives and innovation with regards to liberalism. In modern times, think about how the Cornell Organization for Labor Action has advocated against sweatshop work and lobbied for the university to stop contracting with companies that choose to use sweatshop labor. In the history, recall the Willard Straight Hall takeover, where black students took over the university and forced university administrators to recognize that it's important to increase the representation of minority people on campus, but also support minority flourishing on campus. We think that these are uniquely important goals for the university, and we think that the history of the university really lends itself to this liberal ideas. And we think that it's important to preserve these discussions on campus because they're good for society, they're good for Cornell students because having a more diverse and aware body is important, and these initiatives can only exist because of the hegemony of liberal preferences on campus. And we think that they're independently valuable, so we're willing to accept some marginal cost of conservative marginalization. I'll have 2 points today. First, that there's no broad liberal conspiracy to shut out the conservative voice on campuses. These are merely reflections of demographic and academic functions. And second, that there are independent benefits to preserving the liberal voice on campus because it creates things like understanding and tolerance. But I'll have 3 points of rebuttal. Jess says that professors in the 60s and 70s received death threats during the World Trade Hall takeover, and neither Paul nor I condone this behavior. We think that this is pretty bad. We agree that tolerance is good, but we think that the better environment for tolerance is a liberal environment, one that recognizes that identity and background shapes the way that you view politics, and we think that this is a more progressive way to create dialogue and debate on campus. Jess also talks about her personal experiences with regard to marginalization in class. Now, I can't speak to her anecdotal experiences, and I'm very sad that she had to experience this, but conservative professors are likely to do the same exact thing. Bad, ignorant professors are likely to be bad, ignorant professors, regardless of whether or not they're liberal or conservative. We don't think this is an argument independently against liberal professors. Jess says that there are advantages offered to conservatives because they get to debate with liberal professors, and by the time that they're out of college, they're prepared to take on the real world. But we think that college is also an exploratory experience for people. Recognize that not everybody comes to Cornell with solidified political views. Many people come from familial backgrounds where they have different political views, and they have the opportunity, once they're on campus, once they're independent, once they're free from the societal and background things that shape their identity in the past, they can forge new forms of identity. And we think that liberal views can better cultivate this because it accepts that the status quo is not necessarily the best option and that change is something that's desirable. Yes?
So you mentioned that Cornell's a place where somebody comes to solidify their political identity. I just wanted to ask, can you give me an example of one or maybe two publications that you ever had to read written by a conservative thought leader?
Traditional IR theory in the government department is largely conservative. For example, it argues that American hegemony is important and that the way that government actors engage is one based on hegemony. We don't think that this is necessarily true. I have not, in any class, for example, read feminist IR theory, which argues that this hegemony-based framework is bad. And economics, when we learn about neoclassical economics, this is predominantly what you learn in introductory economics. Yes, you maybe learn about the Laffer curve, but this is hardly a reading of Marxism, right? I think that predominantly in many classes you can see that conservative viewpoints are dominant, and I don't really think that there's this mass problem of marginalization that we'll see on campus. And so that's my first point. There's no liberal conspiracy to deprive conservatives of their viewpoints or the expression of their viewpoints on campus. First, it's just a reflection of demographic preferences. People who are young are more likely to be liberal. College is full of young people. People who are more highly educated just have a tendency to be more liberal, and college is a place where people receive higher education. These are all coincidences, but these are all reasons why liberal preferences are more widely represented. The second is just because of a reflection of academic proceduralism. Insofar as conservatism is a defense of the status quo, an almost dogged defense of the status quo, academics values rigor, academics values skepticism, academics also values change. And because of these preferences, because this is how academia decides to proceed, this inherently challenges the status quo, and this inherently favors liberal viewpoints over conservative viewpoints. And we don't think that this inherent bias is necessarily problematic. We don't think that it really harms international intellectual discourse. And the reason why this occurs is because there are independent benefits of preserving liberal ideas on campus. In nearly every other dominant form of political discussion, conservative, not right now, conservative viewpoints are dominant. And there are trade-offs that exist on campus, right? She mentioned the Cornell Daily Sun. There's a fight for column space in the Cornell Daily Sun. There is a fight for what motions the student assembly should adopt. There's a fight for what rhetoric is dominant on campus, what issues are dominant on campus. And if there is an outpour of conservative views, it necessarily means that less liberal views will be represented. And what's the impact to this, right? College is supposed to be an experience where you're exposed to diversity, and it's supposed to be a place where you can cultivate tolerance. And I think that certain conservative propositions necessarily undercut this. Look at affirmative action, for example, which some people might believe should no longer exist because we've already achieved racial balance on campus. I think that this ignores the fact that racism is still pervasive in the status quo, that individuals who are minorities still receive unequal access to infrastructure, that things like microaggressions shape the way that we experience our collegiate life. And this is something that conservatives say is less important, but this is something that liberals believe needs to be addressed and that we need to continue to work for. Think about sexual assault policy, where it's important to have non-triggering discussions. Conservatives might say it's important for the sexual assault survivor, for example, to be able to have an on-face trial with the perpetrator of this violence. We think that this is bad because it necessarily means that the sexual assault victim is unlikely to do things like talk about his or her experience and unlikely to confront her aggressor. We think that these are liberal ideas that protect student bodies, protect tolerance, and recognize the complexity of minority rights in the status quo, and we think that this is much better for Cornell University.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Julius Kerry.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If this debate were about racial diversity, everyone would agree. Of course, there should be racial diversity on campus. If it were about ethnic diversity, people would say the exact same thing. And yet somehow, when we talk about difference of opinion, difference of ideas, which is what universities are supposed to be about in the first place, there's controversy. It seems to us on our side of the house that promotion of differences of ideas should be what a university is most about, not just promoting differences in terms of how people look, but also differences in how people think. I'll have a few different points for you today. First, I'm going to talk about the ideal of the university and how we think it promotes having more conservative views on campus. Second, the general benefits of having more conservative ideas. And second, the specific policy areas in which conservatives, we think, can enrich debate on campus. But first, I have a few specific points of rebuttal to the prior speaker. The prior speaker gets up and says that a liberal campus is better because liberals understand that, quote, the status quo is not always best. The problem is everybody understands that. There is not one of us in this room that promotes the status quo on every single issue. Conservatives frequently challenge the status quo on things like the welfare state and affirmative action. The question in this debate is why should their side's opinion of which aspects of the status quo ought to be preserved predominate over our side's opinion over what parts of the status quo ought to be preserved. It seems to me that in a truly liberal campus, we should promote a diversity of ideas to discuss and find the right answers to these sorts of questions. The second thing I want to respond to is the idea that more conservative views on campus will necessarily lead to less liberal views on campus, which means less activism on things that they are particularly interested in. Why is it, I asked them, why is it that there is a zero-sum game on the amount of activism or ideas that can occur on a particular campus? Why is it true that if there is more conservative ideas, that there will necessarily be less liberal ideas to be able to engage with?
Point, sir.
The fact of the matter is that you can have the same student population, but nevertheless have that same student population represent a broader range of ideas, enriching the academic and student experiences of people who come to Cornell. The final point I want to respond to is the idea that the problem with conservatives is that we oppose things which they think are almost certainly good. Things like affirmative action. Things like the idea that someone accused of a serious crime on campus should be able to confront their accuser rather than being found guilty under a preponderance of the evidence standard, which is now true in many university proceedings. The problem with that is that's why we have the debate. We don't just say that people who disagree with us are wrong and therefore should not be able to have a platform on campus. We say that if you disagree with me on affirmative action, you should come to the campus. You should be welcome on this campus. And you should we should debate and disagree about it so that we can actually be able to both strengthen our own ideas and consider the other person's ideas as possibly possessing a degree of truth as well. Not at this time. Thank you. Now I want to get into my first point of material, the university ideal. The problem under the status quo is that all too often universities like Cornell have accepted the wrong idea of what a school is supposed to be about. They say that a school should be about being presented with ideas that are true in their opinion, that big government is good, that multiculturalism is good in all of its forms, that race-conscious policies and admissions and hiring are good, and of course, that conservatism is to be ignored. The problem with this idea of a university is that it locks us in to a politically correct consensus, rather than encouraging each of us to engage in critical thought about these particular ideas, it says instead that we should accept groupthink, that we should accept the consensus upon the university because the thought necessary to prove those ideas has already been done. Do not be persuaded when the other side gets up and says that all we're talking about here is the demographic majority associated with liberalism, which is the reason why conservative views don't feel welcome on campus. A few years ago, an article in the Cornell Review challenging the idea of racial preferences was by a resolution of the Student Assembly called to be censored on the basis that it expressed quote-unquote hateful terminology. That is not the mere expression of liberal views. That is the desire of certain liberals on this campus to suppress those which disagree with the consensus. We don't think that ought to be acceptable. What we want is a very different notion of the ideal of the university. We want Cornell to promote a place where everyone's perspective is welcome. Where the truth is not something to merely be told, where the truth is not something to simply be told about, but the truth is something to actively be discovered through the encouragement of a wide variety of views on campus. This ideal of a university enables each of us to have the ability to study and think as we please. But also, it gives us the freedom to progress. Because by locking us all in to what the majority view on campus is now, we prevent the ability of views of students with alternate views to be able to change that consensus, to be able to regress to a point in which what we consider to be sacrosanct under the status quo is not actually widely accepted at a certain future date. Additionally, we think promoting conservative views on campus eliminates the idea that we have a right against offense in the university. We think all too often people feel that if they find something particularly offensive, there is no need to debate it. All you have to do is go to a liberal student assembly or a liberal administration and encourage them to pass some law which will make sure that future quote-unquote hateful terminology will not occur again. Promoting the second, better ideal of the university encourages that we all make sure that we all have the freedom to study and think as we please. I'll take your call.
Okay. Do you support affirmative action in favor of conservative professors in Cornell hiring?
I do not favor affirmative action in favor of conservative professors because I do not believe that we should be treated poorly or well based on our political ideology. I think that would contradict the point that I'm trying to get in here. Yet there are other ways in which you can prevent the marginalization of conservative ideas on campus. Like, for example, checking your free speech policies to make sure those policies do not say to a student group that merely because you take offense to a particular idea, that means you have the right to shut it down. The second point I want to get into is the general benefit of having conservative views on campus. First, we think it provides a new perspective. People who grow up in liberal communities do not have to accept the ideas they grew up with as children. Rather, they can be exposed to new ideas which may better fit what they will come to view as what is good for the world, what is good for this university, and what is good for the country. Second, we think it enables a clash with liberal ideas, where each side can strengthen their own arguments through debates with the other. Those liberal activists that Michelle are so concerned about will be better off in the circumstance in which they have to actually reasonably engage with people who disagree with their perspective. I will concede that it will be easier for them to go through their activism if they do not have to waste time engaging in those particular debates. But that shouldn't be what our university is about. The idea that merely because someone feels strongly about an idea, they shouldn't be forced or encouraged to engage in a strong clash of ideas with another person, which may even force them to reconsider their activism or their mode of engaging in that activism. The final thing I want to address under this point is how allowing conservative ideas on campus also fosters tolerance and diversity. We hear very often that racial diversity is important because people will have their stereotypes about racial minorities broken in circumstances in which they have those racial minorities on campus. We see a similar thing with conservative ideas. It is much harder to pass a resolution calling for the censorship of particular ideas on the basis of false notions which Jess talked about what those people believe in circumstances in which those conservatives feel comfortable expressing their ideas with their friends, their colleagues, and their neighbors. Finally, I want to get into this idea about how specific policy areas where conservatives have useful ideas. I'm running out of time, so I'll go through this quickly. On economics, conservatives can provide free market solutions to things like poverty and inequality. They can promote the idea and what we should be looking at in society is a promotion of equality of opportunity, not equality of results. On education, conservatives can promote the idea of student choice and charter schools as an alternative to the traditional public school. The idea that you, parents, can decide better what school is best for your child than the government can, as a means of actually being able to lift up families who end up who are not rich and who have to engage in some sort of public option to get education for their child. And finally, on racial issues, Conservatives can promote the idea, unpopular as it is, that refusing to divide the country on the basis of race, refusing to treat people differently on the basis of race, can actually be a means of getting over the racial differences of the past. That so long as we can continue to say that what box you check in the racial part of your application can help determine whether or not you get into universities like this one, we end up damaging the idea of equal opportunity. Conservatives can give a different idea of what it means to live in a society where everyone is treated equally regardless of skin color. For those reasons, I ask your support. Thank you very much.
Today's debate, I call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Paul.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out to the debate this morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in this important debate. Michelle and I think that Jessica and Julius are nice people. That being said, we think the ideas that they hope will pervade the campus community and become more prominent on campus are actively damaging and harmful to people throughout society. Michelle and I are not opposed to debate. They want to have a debate, so do we. Michelle and I just happen to think it's good that at the moment the liberals are winning at Cornell. And that's what we're going to defend today. Before I get into my new argumentation about why I think it's important that Cornell teach liberal ideology for students who are likely to be influential and powerful in society, I'd first like to respond to a couple of arguments that are yet to be responded to that were made by this side of the debate. The first thing, and this was in Jessica's speech, was the idea that liberals are unable to respond to conservative arguments effectively because they infrequently hear those arguments. Ladies and gentlemen, in our view, that is an argument for increased education in argumentation and debate, not an argument for increasing the prominence of conservative professors on campus, which even Julius agrees would be an unacceptable proposition to promote conservative professors and hire them over more qualified centrist or liberal professors. No, thank you. The second thing I want to talk about is this question they ask us. They say, why is it a zero-sum game? Why can't it be the case that we can have simultaneously both more liberal and conservative ideas? Well, Julius, because there's a finite number of professors. There are a finite number of students. For every conservative professor that is hired, there is a liberal or centrist professor that is not hired. That's why it's a zero-sum game. The last thing I want us to talk about is the idea of alternative viewpoints. They say that liberals are opposed to the discussion of alternative viewpoints on campus. Nothing could be further from the truth. Liberals have always supported debate and dialogue and discussion. All we stand for is that we think if there is a scenario in which a discussion is likely to harm or offend people, we'd like to reframe that discussion in a way that makes it more accessible to the people who might participate. Furthermore, we'd say that conservatives on campus are just as guilty of repression of alternative thoughts and ideas. Students for Justice in Palestine recently wanted to propose a resolution to the Student Assembly to discuss, not to force, but to discuss divestment from Israel. This resolution was suppressed unilaterally by conservative members of the Student Assembly because they argued that students did not have an interest in these issues. We strongly disagree and think that discussion should have happened. Michelle and I are on the side of discussion, not these guys. I'm now going to move on to why we think that Cornell's mission ought to be a liberal one. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the mission of a university ought to extend beyond the 4 years that students attend that university. We think that once students leave a university, they take the values and norms that that university taught them and bring them into their careers and into their personal lives. Furthermore, and I'll take you in one moment, Jessica. Furthermore, we think that students who graduate from elite universities like Cornell are more likely than others to be successful and powerful. And that's why we think it's even more important that liberal ideas are explained and articulated to these students so that they can carry them out in their daily lives and in their careers. Yes?
So you argue that the people who graduate from Cornell, you want to be very, very successful, and right now we're seeing that the conservative students are actually the ones who become successful in politics because they've had that experience of debate and having their views challenged. How do you respond to that, Paul?
Our argument is that we ought to teach people to respond to the other side of the table. That does not mean that we must teach people that every side of every argument is equally valid. Sometimes one side happens to be right in the view of a particular professor, and we think it ought to be the right of that professor to express that idea so long as that professor does not harm students who offer an alternative perspective in their classrooms. As long as that perspective is welcome, the professor need not argue that it's true in our view. So what challenges do people face in society that we think liberal students from Cornell and other universities are necessary to challenge and change? Ladies and gentlemen, income inequality continues to expand in our society. The wealthier are becoming increasingly wealthier, and the poor are becoming increasingly stratified and socially immobile. We tell you that the most effective and direct solutions to these problems are liberal ones. They include increasing taxes on the wealthy. They include policies which provide increased welfare benefits and increased social mobility projects for people who are born into disadvantaged families at no fault of their own. What we tell you is that when Cornell students who are powerful and successful graduate with these ideas, they are more likely to advocate for these changes and more likely to implement these changes in society, which Michelle and I think is good. Further, we tell you that environmental problems are getting worse and worse. Natural disasters are occurring with increased frequency and increased veracity. And science is moving closer to consensus that this is at least in part a product of global climate change. What we tell you is that pro-business interests, which defend the right of businesses to make a profit at the expense of the environment, are massively economically powerful in society at the moment. What we hope, no thank you, is that liberal students from Cornell will stand as an important ideological counterbalance to this economic dominance that businesses have over the political dialogue. We think without people with these ideologically forward-thinking and perhaps slightly anti-business mentalities, we're unlikely to see important reform that would make the environment cleaner and safer for all of us. Lastly, we would tell you that marginalized groups continue to suffer discrimination throughout society. Recent studies have shown, for instance, and this is just one example, that African American students are twice as likely to be suspended in school for the same offense as a white student. This starts as early as preschool, ladies and gentlemen. What we tell you is that there is good reason to think that subtle biases against particular racial groups continue to pervade our society, and that we need active policies like affirmative action to help combat the pervasive effect of these subtle biases. Liberal students from Cornell with access to the levers of power are the ones that are most likely to achieve that outcome and make society a better and safer place. That's why we're happy that the liberals are winning the debate. Thanks very much.
I would like the debaters to cross the aisle and congratulate each other on a fine debate. Okay, and then we're going to have a vote. I'm going to ask a number of questions so we get. I would ask the debaters to help me count the votes.
Voter fraud.
Okay. So, I'm just asking the question, not who do you believe with, or which side do you agree with, but who do you think did a better job of debating? If you think that the liberal side, this side over here, did a better job of debating, raise your hand. Okay, are you counting?
Oh, we should count.
Okay. Those that believe the conservative side did a better job debating, please raise your hand. Did you count?
More.
Seems like the conservatives did a better job debating. Let's hear it from them. Congratulations. This should be part because they've done studies and they find that people don't usually change their minds after watching debates. Usually it just confirms their already held ideas. But did anybody change their mind on this topic of whether or not Cornell should stop marginalizing conservative ideas after hearing today's debate? Study is true. Okay.